Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Ron Ridenauer, and I'm kicking off the 2025 SSA Glider Pilots Flight Instructor course. We're going to talk tonight from a chapter in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, Chapter 7. You've all been informed to try to look that over a little bit, and hopefully you've had a chance to do that. And we'll get started here. So the panel tonight will be our Soaring Safety Foundation Chairman, Rich Carlson. All these people are flight instructors, CFI-Gs, and have extensive flight instruction given. They'll be fielding questions from you during the course of the meeting, and then we'll take some brief breaks during the presentation to try to answer some of those questions. So please be patient as we go through the presentation tonight. We have Bert Compton, also a Soaring Safety Foundation trustee and an FAA DPE in gliders. Ken Sorensen, the Region 10 director. Bob Wander, Soaring Safety Foundation advisor, and myself, trustee and FAA DPE in gliders and airplanes. Both Bert and I have been doing the DPE work for quite a while. In fact, I'm coming up on my 50th anniversary here later this year, so it's been a long journey for me. So questions and answers should be available during the webinar. I cannot see your questions, me personally, but the other panel members can, and we'll either answer your questions with a text or we'll pose them to me during the training. So we're going to jump right into it and talk about planning an instructional activity. And I know this is like I said, this is Chapter 7 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. There's a lot of other information in there. And as we go along, my intention is to talk to those chapters as well. It'll probably, well, it will be in April of this year. I plan to do the last 4 chapters of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook in the coming weeks. And then in April, I'll plan to start this up again after I'll be out of town for several weeks in March, and we'll get started again in April to try to finish this portion of the instructional periods up. So when planning a instructional activity, we're looking at a course of training or a series of studies, if you please. And we have such things as performance-based objectives, which are outlined on page 5-5, chapter 5, page 5 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, and decision-based objectives outlined on page 5-7 in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. Performance-based are just as you would imagine. I mean, that's, stick and rudder skills is a performance-based objective. The doing a weight and balance is a performance-based objective. Trying to figure out what the performance of a sailplane are all performance-based objectives. Decision-based objectives are more in line with risk management and decision and judgment training. And so both of those concepts will be utilized when you're providing training. As outlined in, and we'll talk more about it later, any kind of training has to start with a base of blocks, kind of like a building block system, progressive blocks that as you go through your training, as you go through training someone, you're progressively building on past training. A good example of that might be that you don't start right in trying to teach somebody a steep turn. you build up to it. You teach them how to fly attitude instrument flying first to control their airspeed, and then you not instrument obviously attitude visual attitude flying, and also you teach them how to do different kinds of turns. Shallow bank turns, medium bank turns, and then finally, eventually steep bank turns. And the pitch attitudes we'll talk about too. We try to teach different types of pitch attitudes. The one place to the culmination of all the lesson plans that you'll be is a training syllabus. So there are many training syllabuses out there. Bob Wander has a training syllabus with a series of lesson plans attached to it. Russell Holtz has a pretty comprehensive training system as well as Tom Knopf. Even though Tom's not with us anymore, I spoke with Doris's daughter, Maria, and she's continuing to support soaring in distribution and sales of Tom's and Doris's books. So you'll have that as a resource as well. Those are probably three of the major resources. I'm not saying that anybody, I'm not aware of any other major resources as of today. I know there are out there. There's foreign resources and perhaps other resources available to us in the United States. We'll be talking about scenario-based training as well, because that's the kind of the crux of the way that we teach. And you are expected to have a knowledge base of a commercial pilot's certificate. And so this will be your chance to convey that knowledge in a teaching method or teaching of the subject matter. So as a flight instructor, that's your primary goal, is to teach. And if you are effective at it, I mean, as you go along, you get more effective at it, to be quite honest, because you get more practiced at it. And I know when I first started, I was pretty nervous about teaching, and I still remember like it was yesterday. I had a gal in the front seat of a 222, and after we landed, she turned around and she looked at me. You got to remember, I was only 22 years old at the time. She turned around at me and she had a big grin on her face. She says, "I'll bet I'm your first student, aren't I?" So I was a little bit deflated, let's just put it that way. I thought I was doing a pretty good job. And later I figured out that I wasn't probably doing as good a job. And later on, I did do a better job. So, but it all starts with a good, solid knowledge base and a series of lessons that you can rely on to make sure that you cover the materials adequately. So here's the purpose of the lesson plan, and this is outlined in Aviation Instructor's Handbook, page 7-8. So selection of materials, references. I think that references are really important aspect of teaching, because if you don't have references that you can point your students to, it basically becomes your hearsay of knowledge, and versus the knowledge that the FAA or whoever wants you to learn. You know, as a pilot examiner, Bert and I are we're required to evaluate your students in accordance with the FAA publications. That's the way it is. And so, and I know that FAA isn't the end all be all, but certainly I think they have a fairly good, solid background of reference materials and knowledge for you to draw on. Another purpose is to aid the instructor in an organized presentation. You know, you have to be somewhat organized to be able to, again, make an adequate presentation, which is doesn't miss key points as you're providing the instruction. It purpose of a lesson plan provides an outline of the teaching procedures that you might want to use. You know, there are many different ways to present things, lecture method like we're doing right now today, or kind of a give and take methodologies where you and your student have a interaction between each other, guided discussion. You can kind of push the discussion in the way that you want it to be pushed, but or guide it, and it becomes more effective. We'll talk about lesson objectives, content, and completion standards, because those are all key pieces to any lesson plan. It gives some confidence to the inexperienced instructor. So hopefully that's something that you can construct, whether you, we're going to talk about here in a second, whether you have a pre-made lesson that you've downloaded off the internet, or whether it's a lesson that you actually created yourself. It provides for uniformity of instruction, and we want to try to use as much as we can scenario-based training concepts, and we'll talk more about that later. Even if you do have your own or use pre-made lesson plans, you need to do your own research, because some of the things that you learned during your instruction, growing through your career in aviation, you may have forgotten some of the finer points or some of the key details, and so it's important that you reread the concepts that you want to try to teach, so that you can refresh your memory about what those are. You know, I was talking to Ken Sorensen, one of our panel members earlier, and he was saying how he's going to take a flight instructor refresher course this weekend that's put on by the Soaring Safety Foundation. And before he's going to go into that, he this week has looked at the lessons that are posted online at the SSF website to refresh his memory about some of the things that we talk about during the refresher class. Is there any questions so far? Any panel members have any questions? It doesn't, I guess I'm getting through, right? Somebody respond. Rich, you're hearing me okay?
Yes, you're good, Ron.
Okay.
There's a question about using Condor, including Condor in lesson plans.
And we're going to touch on that briefly. I think that that's a good way to operate. You know, we have a Condor simulator in our club, and we've been growing with it. It takes some time to get that involved with the training, but here in the wintertime, when we don't fly up north here in the Chicago area, it's a good way to involve our students with some kind of training. So we'll talk more about that in the future here.
And there's another question that came in about lesson plans. Do DPEs prefer the candidates to create their own or use pre-made plans? And you kind of touched on that.
Yeah, I did. I kind of touched on that. Obviously, if you make it, so it's kind of a double-edged question. Okay, I don't. It's refreshing to hear someone who's made up their own lesson plan, because usually they offer different points of views than some of the canned lesson plans that they can download off the internet. Either way, it's more the way that they use that lesson plan that I'm more interested in. Bert, are you online?
No, he's not here.
Okay, Bert's supposed to be online, and he could maybe offer some insight into that as well. But um, I I enjoy kind of a refreshing viewpoint. The key thing that I think a instructor has to be careful about is teaching to the test. And that, when I say that, I mean, instead of teaching um, slow flight in its entirety, they tend to teach only those aspects that are outlined in the PTS under the completion requirements. I think that you owe it to your students to have a complete lesson that maybe includes some things that aren't, we can't test, we can't evaluate every single little thing. And so I would encourage you to make sure that when you're developing lesson plans, that you develop it based on the teaching material, like your high school or college professor did. I mean, they looked at the material that they were trying to teach, and they used the material in the chapter. They just didn't teach the test. And so I think we have to be. I know that that's the objective of a new instructor, is to try to pass the practical exam. Uh, but I think I think if you develop your own lesson plans, you tend to maybe do a little more research than you might not otherwise. In fact, I can tell you from I give some flight instructor initial in gliders, but most of the flight instructor initials that I give are in airplanes, and unfortunately, I find that they teach pretty much to the test, which is, I guess, a little disappointing to me.
This is just to throw in a suggestion. When I did my CFI-G prep, what I did was I took some essentially pre-made lesson plans and then tweaked them a bit. So the tweaking process kind of made them more my own, but rather than starting from scratch, I started with somebody else's work product.
And I think that's very valid, Ken. I mean, sometimes we have to have a starting point, and I think that that is a valid way to do it. And you want to kind of make it your own. That's your style. You get to figure out what your style is as an instructor. We don't all have the same style and of teaching, and so by tweaking a lesson plan that maybe is more generic, I think that allows the instructor to show their own style as to how they want to teach. So good point, Ken. Thanks. Uh, so research, you've got to research the subject matter. You have to become a SME, a subject matter expert. If you, again, I've examined numerous instructor candidates who, if I ask a few questions off of their game plan, off of their from about subject matter that may not be included specifically in their outline or their lesson plan, they sometimes struggle, which is an indication to me that they're not a subject matter expert. That they and I don't go way off base. I mean, I think that they're concepts that they should know. Simple concepts like what's the difference between true airspeed and indicated airspeed. I've had a number of instructors who can't tell me that. So, and I think that that's something that's important. It allows you to well-planned lesson plan allows you to organize your subject matter. Training aids. Somebody just asked about simulation. I think simulation is a very good training aid, and we've had Scott Manley has made it has promoted it for many years. He made several Condor training videos for the Soaring Safety Foundation, and you can find those simulations that Scott produced on the Soaring Safety website. also web-based scenarios. You know, we also on the Soaring Safety site, Soaring Safety Foundation site, there's a link where you can actually go and look at some of the scenarios that we, the trustees and the instructors that teach the FERCs, have come up with. They're you know, maybe a short paragraph or something like that, and they allow the instructor candidate to look at those and use those to teach with. Um, I'll in a few minutes here, we'll go to the Soaring Safety Foundation website and we'll look at some of that. You know, the well-planned lesson is a working document. You may be tweaking it as you're going along even. You know, Ken talked about tweaking it. It's just an outline, and it helps to have a working document outline, to have unity, to have content, make sure you're making sure that you're giving all the content that you want to give, the scope of what you're trying to show, the practicality. Sometimes you have to be flexible and, you know, kind of shift based on the personality of your student. You know, they may be a visual learner instead of a hands-on learner, or they may be a hands-on learner instead of a bookworm. So I mean, you have to be flexible in your training. Show the relationship to the overall curriculum or the syllabus or the course, if you want to put it that way. And it provides, you know, step-by-step instructions as to how to present your lesson. So I'm going to just briefly build a very, very simple lesson plan here. Okay, the lesson objective, which should always be taught, is going to be teaching straight, flying straight with the wings level in level flight, and then also in turning flight. So the lesson content would be the control inputs and the axes of the glider. You know, pitch around the lateral axis. I basically start off by teaching 3 pitch attitudes. And those would be the slow flight, or the flight at minimum controllable airspeed pitch attitude, the normal glide or the bestol or D pitch attitude, and the pattern or the approach pitch attitude. And notice I emphasize pitch attitudes versus speed. Yes, they are related to speed, but they're, you know, if you know what the pitch attitude is and you glance inside at the airspeed indicator and you're holding that pitch attitude, you will be flying the speed that you want to be flying. Versus if you do it the opposite way, where you teach fly 60 knots on the approach, and your student is concentrating on the airspeed indicator and ignoring that pitch attitude, you, the instructor sitting in the back seat, will be able to tell that almost immediately, because they'll be up and down. I mean, the pitch attitude will be going up sometimes and down as they try to chase after that airspeed. And then roll about the longitudinal axis. Again, we teach basically teach 3 bank angles: a shallow bank turn, which we use in slow flight or when we're flying at minimum controllable airspeed, a medium bank turn, and a steep bank turn. And I know when we're thermaling, we use steep bank turns, but we do fly at the minimum or the minimum sink speed for that angle of bank. So it's faster than the minimum sink speed would be during slow flight. And consequently, the pitch attitude would be different as well. And then we talk about yaw about the vertical axis. And basically, we want to teach about adverse yaw and how to use the rudder to balance or counteract that adverse yaw effect that we get from using the ailerons. And then, like I said, a simple lesson plan building would be completion standards. And for student pilots, instructors are sometimes confused as to how to what standards to use or how to evaluate student pilots. And I teach to use the list of common errors, which can be found in the glider flying handbook, because if they're not making those common errors, I think that they're ready for flight on their own. Versus if people are eventually going for a practical test, whether it's private or commercial, you would use the PTS standards for completion standards and evaluating their performance as in those instances. I'm going to take a short break here. Any of my advisors have any questions that we should discuss maybe?
Ken, I've got just a comment. I found that in the PTS for becoming an instructor, so the CFI-G PTS, for each one of the tasks that you're supposed to teach, there's a list of common errors. So I made myself up basically a little booklet that has the list of the things that you're supposed to teach with each task, and then also a list of the common errors so that you know what to look for and can help make sure that the student doesn't make them.
Yeah, you offer a really good point, Ken. You know, Ken's probably one of our newer instructors amongst this group. You know, the rest of us have been around for a while, but Ken's been doing this now for, I believe, about 10 or 11 years. And I remember when he came to me at one of the seniors contests, he says, you know, Ron, I'm thinking about becoming an instructor. And I said, great, you know, that's that's what we need. We need people in the business who want to do it. And so he went through that endeavor. He told me today when I was talking to him earlier that he spent about 6 months in preparation for doing this. And they had seminars within their club there in the Houston area. And then his final to completion was that he went to, remind me again, Ken, where did you go to complete the instruction?
I went to Estrella.
Estrella,
Basically,
that's right.
I studied up, took the written exams, and then went there for 4 days and had the fire hose effect of prep for the oral. And then at the end of that 4 days, the DPE came out and tortured me for a day, and we got it done.
Yeah, well, that's, you know, but leading up to that was a lot of work on Ken's part. I want everybody to know that, you know, you get back what you put into it. And so it requires a lot of work. You know, I'm sure Ken felt very confident because he, you know, was a commercial pilot, and he probably thought, well, you know, I'm going to be really good at this. But just because you're good at flying doesn't mean you're going to be a good instructor, because that's what, you know, we're trying to create and encourage you to become instructors. And this Aviation Instructor's Handbook talks to the fundamentals of instructing and how to become a better instructor. And like I said, as we go through this, you'll find that it talks to many of the things that you will need, many of the tools that you will need to become a good instructor. So,
yeah, Ron, Bob Wander here. Can I weigh in for a
yes,
moment? Over.
absolutely, yes.
Yeah, the common errors, it's helpful for the instructor to recognize them, particularly new instructors, so that they can help correct them. We've covered that. But there's another component to that, and that is that the candidate making those common errors does not know that they are common. And every time he or she screws up, he thinks, I can't do this. I don't belong here. This is not my sorority or my fraternity. I should find a hobby closer to the ground. You instructors, you need to be able, obviously you're going to find, if you do a lot of instruction, occasionally you'll find a candidate who is not qualified to solo and license. But almost everybody that comes to you is qualified. And when they get discouraged, when they see those common errors and commit them, it's your job to say, hey, yeah, take a number, pal. I got there first. So you and I are going to work together and we're going to overcome this. This is how we're going to do it. The mistakes you made, the judgment errors you made are as common as dirt. And we are now going to find a way that you will not be held back by these little failures, these minor mistakes. These mistakes are as common as dirt. So let's climb this hill together. That, to me, that's extremely important. And that's why in the books that I write, that I put a very large emphasis on these common errors, not only to help the instructor candidates, which is great, but to help the primary candidate who doesn't have the instructor's background to say, hey, look, mate, yeah, you screwed up. Let's fix it. Over.
Yeah, that's a good observation, Bob. And we're going to talk about keeping students motivated in a future seminar. And so Bob speaks the truth. You know, you've got to identify how to keep your students motivated and your learners motivated. You know, the new Aviation Instructor's Handbook talks about that these people that we're teaching are learners versus students. I'm not sure why they necessarily changed the terminology, but you know, as I go through and I'm gonna, you know, I learned the word student, but in today's knowledge, we try to use the word learners because that's what they, young and old, they're all learners.
So Ron, there's a question here regarding the use of video clips is to augment any kind of written scenarios.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I'm actually going to try to show a video clip a little bit later this evening off of the Soaring Safety Foundation website. I think that one of the most common questions I get consistently is instructors wanting to know how to do the slip to landing maneuver. And Bert Compton, one of our trustees, performed that maneuver with some videographers on board, and they really captured the essence of the slip to landing as we examiners would like to see it accomplished. And I've heard, you know, from some instructors through the years that, well, you know, that's really a tough maneuver to do in a more slippery fiberglass sailplane, even like ASK-21. And interestingly enough, that's what Bob did it in. That's what the maneuver was performed in an ASK-21. And so it's an interesting maneuver to watch on video. And yes, I highly encourage instructors to utilize some of the videos that the Soaring Safety Foundation is using and that Bert has produced and that Scott Manley have produced, and that you know, even your own. I mean, there are good ways to analyze a person's performance using taking your own video and then watching the video on the ground, or looking at a trace afterwards to see exactly how you flew the pattern. I mean, you'd probably be amazed at some of the traffic patterns that we see utilizing the downloaded traces from GPS. You think you're doing one thing, but it's something. A lot of times you're doing something else. So I definitely think that does have purpose. Another thing that's really important is you got to keep track of your students' progress. And here, this is right out of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. It just so happens it's a glider check rides, a glider oriented checklist of items. The number of the lesson is across the top there, and the type of maneuver or something like that that's being looked at. And then you can put dates and instructors' initials at the bottom. And I've used a numbering system of just 1 to 5, whereas A 1 is an indication that the instructor has introduced that maneuver or that procedure to the learner. A 2 would be that the learner is accomplishing that procedure or maneuver, but under the direction of the instructor. In other words, they're not quite ready to accomplish it on their own. A 3 would be that they're able to accomplish it on their own and well enough to solo to on that particular maneuver or procedure. And then a 4 would be that they would be competent to fly that maneuver on their own during a check, a private pilot check or a commercial pilot check. And a 5 would be that they maybe, or if they're going all the way to the CFI, that they could use that maneuver is good enough for a CFI type candidate. So, but utilize some way to keep track of the student's progress and not just writing, hey, we did box the wake on the toe. I mean, I think it's really important both for motivation to the student, and if you happen to, learner happens to go between different instructors, many clubs don't have the luxury of having the same instructor out there all the time. And so if they're flying with different instructors, the instructor can pick up a sheet like this and get a fairly good idea about where that learner is at with their instructional period. So I think it's really an important step to do that. And many of the authors that I've mentioned already, Bob and Holtz and Tom Knopf, they recommend that same tracking type system. So let's talk a little bit about scenario-based training. And here's just some, again, this is right out of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. It's on page 713. I'll talk to a couple of main points to remember. You can read down through them on your own, or you can look in the Aviation Instructor's Handbook and review them on your own. I think about halfway down the list there, the most learning solutions should employ both a traditional training methods and scenario-based training methods. Scenario-based training allows you, the instructor, to better evaluate the instruction that you've given, because now the student has to evaluate the scenario that you're giving them, and they have to offer their opinion about what they would do about that scenario. And that gives you a real tool as an instructor to evaluate what that student has perceived from your instruction. So I think it's really a good tool to give both traditional training methods, but also incorporate scenario-based training as much as you can through the process. A typical scenario-based training might be in flight scenarios, might be the traffic pattern and landings. I mean, eventually you have to allow the learner to make mistakes, and then you can critique those mistakes after, assuming you can't let them go outside the boundaries of safety, obviously, but you can, then you have something to critique. And the Soaring Safety Foundation has, for years, has promoted what we call the goal-oriented approach to making approaches and landings. And so the goal, obviously, is to land on the field safely. And so how you get to that goal, whether you have to fly a different type of pattern, is largely based on how much altitude you have, right? And so if you find yourself low, and you will want to modify the pattern and not go all the way to the IP, so to speak. You might want to just fly a base leg and a final leg, Or instead of flying a left-hand pattern, fly a right-hand pattern because you can't get over to the other side of the airport to fly your traditional left-hand pattern. So in-flight scenarios, there's something that you can discuss on the ground and actually pose in the air. Non-flight scenarios like pre-flight inoperative equipment. You know, what say, you know, you propose a scenario of you walk out to the glider and the airspeed indicator is reading 60 knots. Well, you know, what are you going to do? You know, obviously the indicator it may not be broken because I've actually seen that happen. And I'm sure a lot of experienced instructors have seen that happen many times. It's simply water gotten somehow into the pitot tube, rain or whatever, either whether the cover was defective or maybe the cover was not on, and it might produce that because the blockage in the pitot system. So take the pitot hose off of the instrument and let it drain out, and a lot of times that'll fix something like that. So I use NTSB incident and accident reports a lot. Many times, many of the scenarios I make up are based on actual incidents or accidents. And so they're a good resource to create scenarios for your learners. So, and as I said before, this allows the instructor to evaluate what the student has learned. And because you can't tell what their perceptions are unless you get feedback. As an instructor, it's very, very difficult for you to tell what their perceptions are. And so you need that feedback. It's very valuable for you, the instructor. I'll take another short break here. We got any more comments?
So there's a couple here. One, earlier on, you were talking about common errors and learning plateaus. And the question was, when do you introduce that kind of issue to the student or learner?
Well, again,
Rich,
go ahead.
Bob, on here, could you repeat the question? I didn't understand the last bit of your question. Over.
The only thing in the chat is discuss learning plateau from day one. So I believe that the individual is asking, when would you bring that discussion up with the learner?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to analyze sometimes. You have to, when you do discuss or when you do figure out that the learner is on a plateau, you have to figure out how to motivate them through that plateau and get them to move on. And learning plateaus are normal. We all have been there, and sometimes it takes a little bit of a different look at things to get through that plateau. Sometimes changing instructors might have a beneficial effect to allow that learner to see a different point of view or a different way of doing the same thing that might be more in tune with what they want. So we'll go more into depth in that particular regime when we get into teaching. I believe that's chapter 4 or 5 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook. We'll get more into learning plateaus then.
Bob Wander here. Can I weigh in for 20 seconds?
Sure.
If the candidate, the learner, is stuck on a plateau, the instructor's job is to find out what it is that is causing the problem, what the obstacle is, and then break that obstacle down into smaller and smaller and still smaller jobs until the learner candidate can sweep them up and conquer them one little tiny job at a time. Over.
Yeah, that's a good way to attack it. That's a good way to think about it, Bob.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I'll give you a quick example. If I have somebody who can't fly on aerotow for 1 minute without assistance from me, then I cut it down to, let's try 5 seconds. All right, you did it for 5. Great, I'll take it. Now let's shoot for 10 seconds. You'll have the controls for 10 seconds. Great. Now let's go for 15. You see what I mean? It's little tiny baby steps towards proficiency. Over.
And
Somewhat
Ron, there was another kind of general question here about training maneuvers. When do you think you're going to cover that kind of topic area? Actually,
That'll be-
teaching various
that-
maneuvers.
That'll be in April. We'll talk about that at some of the sessions in April.
I'm not on. There I am.
Thank you.
Hey, quickly, Bert here.
Yes, Bert.
One technique I use, of course, pre-briefing the lesson is very important with the lesson plan, but debriefing is important. And at the end of the day, I'll ask the student, so you understand everything we did? Any questions? And they all, uh-huh. And I say, good, give me 10 questions tomorrow morning. But you're going to be there tonight thinking, what did Bert mean by that? And I want 10 questions. And sometimes I get 15 or 20. Now, then again, if someone's not improving, I have to look back at myself. Am I using too many expressions? Am I shortcutting some things? I mean, we know this. It's like teaching someone to drive a stick shift car, both feet and both hands going on like that. So I've got to blame myself or look at myself at the end of the day and then see those 10 questions the next morning, and it really moves things along.
Good point, Bert.
Yeah, bravo, Bert. Thanks.
Hi, Bob.
And Ron, again, there's another question here regarding training and teaching techniques, which again, you'll cover later on in one of the later sessions.
Yeah, I really will. I mean, I started here with lesson plans because I think that's my personal feeling is that we need to have some thoughts about how to build a lesson plan. But there's many other aspects that we have to cover, and we will cover in the coming weeks. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So we've talked about tonight, the course of training and the training syllabus that we have, and how the training syllabus is made up of lesson plans. And those lesson plans are made up of blocks of learning. We want to start with the small, like Bob was mentioning there, and go to the larger, more complex scenarios and complex, flying with the wings level, flying straight ahead with the wings level is eventually has to be fairly simple, and because we'll be training more, they'll have to worry more about their planning in the pattern or their planning on a cross country or something like that versus flying the sailplane. So, and I think that it's really important to have a scenario-based training methodology as well. So try to, and like I said, the Soaring Safety Foundation website has many of those training, scenario-based training items. Let me come off of this page and let's look at.
So before you do, Ron, there's a couple of questions here.
Okay.
Do you recommend creating lesson plans for each specific maneuver, or do they cover more the entire training flight like a plan of action?
Sorry, I'd started this already. But say it one more time, Rich.
Sure. Do you recommend creating lesson plans for each specific maneuver, or do they cover an entire training flight, more like a plan of action?
Well, that's, both have to be done. I mean, obviously, any kind of flight is going to be a series of maneuvers. And I think, though, however, each maneuver deserves its own lesson plan so that and then you combine those lesson plans into a complete flight. I mean, initially you're not going to work, at least I don't work that hard on the toe during the first several toes. Instead, I work hard for them to look outside, enjoy what they're seeing outside, and try to figure out what they're seeing outside relative to where the field's at, relative to other traffic, other sailplane traffic or airplane traffic or whatever. And that focuses their attention on not trying to learn how to fly the toe, because initially I think that it's going to be very difficult before they learn some basics of how to manage the pitch attitude, how to manage the bank angle and things like that, because until they can do that, they're not really going to fully understand how to accomplish that. And so I think that it's important that in these building blocks that we have, that you and then I think the question was, how do you relate that? But I think each lesson has to be somewhat independent. However, the entire flight is going to be, like you said, is going to be all encompassing, and you're going to be, as an instructor, talking about other aspects of the flight as well.
So Ron, just to expand, I mean, basically, it seems like any particular flight is likely to have multiple lessons contained within the flight, right?
It will. That's correct. Absolutely, it will. It absolutely will. However, as an instructor, I think it's important that you, the instructor, are able to break down each of those maneuvers or whatever you're trying to teach, so that your learner has some insight as to how to perform those individual tasks, and then has an understanding about how to perform the group of those tasks in a complete flight. Absolutely.
Wander here. One
Yeah.
of the things I learned is that when I had a flight school and was doing this for a living, that I learned very quickly was, you know what? I have not been handing off to the candidate, the learner, his or her responsibilities as clearly as I should have done. So when I realized this was a shortcoming of my own instruction, I would take the candidate aside and say, okay, look, today's the day. Right now, from here on out, from here right now, no full stop, the aerotow launch, the takeoff, the ground roll, everything, it's up to you. I'm handing that off to you. I want no part of supervising you. Do you understand? Then later I would hand off all of the decisions to be made in free flight. I don't want to decide for you anymore. I don't want to keep you within gliding range of the airport. I'm telling you, this is now your responsibility. I am telling you, I'm handing this off to you. I'm not your fairy godmother anymore. And when I did that, the candidates understood, oh, he meant what he said. It's really on my shoulders now to decide, to make decisions, safe decisions that will guarantee safe outcome of flight. This is one of the things that, when you're new as an instructor, is hard to do, and it's what you actually need to empower the candidate to do, to tell them that you in the back seat are no longer going to save their bottom, that they need to decide. Once you do that, you'll find the candidate, Bert, I think, is nodding his head. The candidate will look you in the eye and say, okay, I'll do that with you. Right, that's a deal. I'll take over. And if they screw up once in a while, you're still their fairy godmother, but you have handed over responsibility for their safety of flight to them. And I think a lot of instructors sort of fail to do that. They just sit in the back seat as fairy godmother until the candidate solos. Over.
Bob, Bert here. I recall you saying years ago, and I use it now, you tell the learner, your job is to make me obsolete.
Yeah, to put me out of work, basically, yeah.
To make me obsolete. And I just want to throw one thing in real quick. We're going to get to instructional techniques later, but I find too many instructors try to talk people through maneuvers, aerotow especially, and landing. And Derek Piggott, the legendary instructor in the UK, once said that the learner will hear just the first 6 words you say, and the rest of it is like the Charlie Brown thing when the adults talk. Wah, 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 wah. So you have to use another Bob Wander quote, economy of words. And that's part of your lesson plan. You almost have to sit there by yourself and develop your patter, as Derek Piggott would say, to where it's concise and to the point. And an economy of words is what they'll hear. But too many instructors, it seems, want to talk people through the maneuvers. And I think it's very important the instructor demonstrate, and with no blame on the student, say, let me show you that again. And the student tries again. Let me show you that again. Because if they don't see the picture, and that's why we develop many of the videos, they don't see the picture of you doing it as perfectly as you can. It'll speed things up if you demonstrate.
Yeah, that's a good point. And Bob, you make a good point. I mean, I don't do as much glider instruction as I used to, but I do see candidates all the time for private airplane rating or something like that, and it's disappointing to me because and this is no, I'm not kidding. The private pilot applicant shows up, he's got 90 hours of dual and 10.1 hours of solo because he needs 10 hours. And it's disappointing to me that people think that somehow that 90 hours of dual, that they've never been handed off, as Bob points out, and Bert points it out too, that they've never been asked or demanded to take that responsibility. And I think that's key. I think that's absolutely key, is that you pass off that responsibility and don't do it all at once. You do it piecemeal. You do it one step at a time. And so
You do it task by task until there are no tasks that the candidate can no longer perform.
right.
Then you get out of the back seat and you watch from the ground.
Yep. Good point. Good point. Let me go back to sharing my screen here and just finish up what I had, and then we'll. I do want to try to get in and show a video here.
While you're getting it set up,
Set up.
Ron, there are a couple questions here regarding, again, teaching techniques, which will get covered at a future class.
Yes, definitely those will be covered in a future class. Okay, we'll hide that. So these are some of the resources and references that I've used in preparing this. And Bob Wander has a great set of lesson plans and materials. Russell Holtz has a great set of lesson plans and materials. Tom Knopf, God rest his soul, has developed a great set of lesson plans and materials. And I think I mentioned earlier, his Doris's daughter, Maria, is continuing to run that website and sell those books for the estate. Scott Manley has dedicated much of his time to Condor Flight Simulator as a Condor Flight Simulator instructor, and has had good success at that. So he's produced those Condor videos on the Soaring Safety Foundation website. If you haven't ever looked at them, I encourage you to do so. Dave Seymour, many of us kind of want to get this knowledge test stuff out of the way. And that's good. That's a good way to motivate yourself. I know Ken said that was kind of his initial thrust, was to get the knowledge test things out of the way and then move on to some real learning. So Dave Seymour runs the gliderpilotsgroundschool.com. His next, for private commercial CFI-G, his next 3-evening class will be held on February 11th, 12th, and 13th in the evening, and it's a Zoom type of presentation. He's got books as well to pass out, and so you get a book, for the private pilot knowledge test. You go through his class, and he guarantees you're going to pass. And so I think that, and I think he's had a fairly good track record at doing it. So I would highly encourage that. I know that Ken used Dauntless, Dauntless, as a prep course for taking the knowledge test as well. These are our future classes here on January 29th. We're going to delve into chapter, chapter 8 of the Aviation Instructor's Handbook on January 29th. I'll be gone next week. I'm going on a little ski vacation. So 2 weeks from tonight, Aviation Instructor Handbook, Chapter 8. It talks about the aviation instructor's responsibilities and professionalism. You know, we are professionals and we need to make sure that we act as professionals to accept that responsibility as an aviation instructor. The following week on February 5th, we'll delve into Chapter 9, Techniques of Flight Instruction. And I think this is our opportunity to talk about some of those techniques that people have been asking questions about. February 19th, so we'll skip the week, the February 12th week, because that's if you want to partake of Dave Seymour's instructional class, that's when he's going to be doing it, that week of the February 11th, 12th, and 13th. Actually, I'll be going on another ski trip, so I'm going to be unavailable as well. And then February 19th, the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, Chapter 10. And this is, you know, we really get into teaching some of the practical aspects of risk management during flight instruction, which is really important. Teaching risk management, decision making, and judgment training is really an important. Equally as important as the stick and rudder skills that we want to develop. We've got to teach people to make good decisions. And so that brings us down to the some of the additional references I use. The Glider Flying Handbook. You know, we have a brand new one out, the -13B, and that's can be downloaded PDF form off the FAA website. They just recently published the complete book in one PDF. Previously, it was on there in like 10 or 12 PDFs, one for each chapter, but they just recently published the entire handbook in one PDF. The Aviation Instructor's Handbook is also there, the -9B. That's relatively new. It's within the last couple of years. And the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, which is kind of often overlooked in sailplane flying, but it has a lot of really good information. And I know that Russell Holtz created his own Pilot's Handbook of Glider Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, but the FAA publication version just came out with a new version, the -25 Charlie, and those can all be downloaded off the FAA.gov website. It's a little bit. I think I put on my initial how to get into that website to see these publications. One thing you can do is on the inquiry part, you can write, if you type in there the FAA-H-8083-13B, it'll take you automatically to that publication. So.
Yeah, and Ron, just to get to in the United States, to get to the FAA publications page, you can just use any reasonable search engine, Google or whatever you like, and just type FAA publications, and it will take you to the home page where you can download the Instrument Flying Handbook, Helicopter Flying Handbook, and so on and so on. So, over.
Okay. Thanks for that insight as well. I really want to show this video that Bert came up with. I think that it's an excellent video and talks about slip to landing. And I know that many people, like I said, I think one of the most asked for things that they instructors ask for is is how do I teach or how do I make the slip to landing? And so Bert worked with his videographer to develop for the Soaring Safety Foundation, and it teaches you exactly what. So I'll let it go from there.
When you see me on final on the slip, we're using a zoom lens, and the effect looks a little hazardous.
Oh, wait a minute. Is I may have to. Is the audio coming through?
No.
Okay, hang on a second.
Well,
Let me go back. Yeah, let me go back. I didn't set it up right. I apologize. Let me go back here and set it up correctly.
Determine that the applicant, 1, exhibits knowledge of the elements
Are you
related
hearing
to
the
forward,
audio now?
side,
Yes.
and turning
Okay.
slips to landing, with and without the use of drag devices. 2, recognizes the situation where a slip should be used to land in a desired area. 3, establishes a slip without the use of drag devices. 4, maintains the desired ground track. 5, maintains proper approach attitude. 6, makes smooth, proper, and positive control applications during recovery from the slip. And 7, touches down smoothly within the designated landing area. A forward slip is used to steepen the approach path without increasing airspeed and with the track of the glider aligned with the runway centerline. Therefore, in a forward slip, the nose of the glider may be pointed away from the runway. A side slip is used when compensating for a crosswind. In the side slip, the nose of the glider is pointed approximately straight to the runway, with the upwind wing lowered. The resultant track of the glider and the longitudinal axis remain approximately aligned with the runway centerline. Turning slips are accomplished by establishing a slip, then increasing the amount of aileron on the lower wing, causing a controlled slipping turn. Slips to landing without the use of drag devices. The scenario is a failure of a drag device such as spoilers, air brakes, or landing flaps, possibly due to a mechanical failure. When the drag device simulated failure is announced by the examiner, the applicant should verbally acknowledge the situation, enter the landing pattern, and immediately enter a slip on the downwind leg, with the low wing towards the runway in order to maintain a visual reference to the runway environment, aim point, touchdown point, and desired stopping point. A normal rate of descent in the pattern is achieved by slipping. The pilot may observe that the indicated airspeed may be much lower than normal due to lower dynamic pressure at the pitot tube. Therefore, a pitch attitude that is typical of normal glide should be held, with very little increase in actual airspeed when the glider comes out of the slip. A turning slip is used to make the turns to base and final. On short final approach, the amount of slip throughout the pattern should have been adequate to possibly allow the examiner to announce that air brakes, spoilers, or flaps may now be applied if the slipping approach would have resulted in a landing within the available length of runway or in a designated area. The pilot must not force the glider onto the runway, nor allow a PIO, pilot-induced oscillation, to occur. The landing should result in a smooth round out and touchdown with the longitudinal axis of the glider aligned with the runway to avoid side loads on the landing gear. Common student errors in the forward slip, which is used to steepen the landing approach without significant increase in airspeed. Indecision about entering the slip or confusing the purpose of the side and forward slips. Dangerously skidding the glider instead of slipping the glider. Rough handling of the controls, creating an unnecessarily rapid yaw rate instead of moving smoothly in and out of the slip. Not maintaining control of the slip with the appropriate application of aileron and rudder, therefore moving in and out of the slip. If the slip has resulted in an excess loss of altitude, then a return to normal flight is required to reestablish the correct descent profile, then reapplying the slip as required in order to maintain the desired descent rate and profile. Allowing an excessive increase in airspeed by pitching the glider nose below the sight picture of a normal glide, perhaps influenced by the airspeed indicator reading lower than normal due to the reduced dynamic pressure at the pitot tube. Not aligning the glider with the runway extended centerline on final approach. On final approach, slow to smoothly come out of the slip back to a normal wings level flight in order to avoid a hard landing or having a wing dangerously close to the ground. Allowing any crosswind aloft to cause an overshoot of the final approach leg. Landing with the longitudinal axis of the glider not aligned with the runway, causing a side load on the landing gear. Not landing in the designated area. Forcing the glider onto the runway instead of making a smooth round out and touchdown. On landing rollout, not maintaining control of the glider if it tends to weather vane into a crosswind. Many of the same errors occur on both the forward slip and the side slip, since both types of slips use similar flight control inputs. The difference is that the pilot intentionally orients the fuselage in a manner that results in the desired track over the ground. Again, a forward slip is used to lose height without gaining airspeed and with a desired ground track. A side slip is used to counter crosswind drift, resulting in the desired ground track on final approach to the runway. It is very important that the pilot initiate a proper entry into a slip and never skid the glider.
Thanks, Bert, for taking the time to make that possible for everybody to observe. And, I hope that people use that in the future to teach their students how to do that particular maneuver. So it's very well done. Thanks. So that pretty much concludes what I had to say. Is there somebody else on the panel that wants to make a comment before we sign off today? And we'll see you again in 2 weeks. Like I said, I'm going skiing next week, and then I'll be back in 2 weeks to do the next lesson.
Yeah,
Please.
Ron, I have a question on behalf of the attendees. Where do they find the recording of these sessions? Over.
Well, I don't think that the repository has been firmly established yet, but my understanding is we're going to put them on the SSA website at some point in time. I'll have to, and I'll have Denise try to get that information out to everyone so that they know where it's going to be at. A couple of notes here before we sign off. We're going to plan to try to register for the next seminar so that you'll sign up with an email. The email we would like you to use would be that email that you would use at the FAA safety.gov site so that we can give you wings credit. The goal there would be to give you some wings credit for attending that class. And we'll try to do that in the future for the other classes as well. So the plan is to have you, we'll send out emails to the people that were here, and we'll send out the blanket emails, and we'll, Frank has got a methodology for us to enroll or register rather for the webinar in 2 weeks. And then that'll allow us to issue wings credits. So
Also, Ron, we should mention that we set up a Google discussion group for the CFI-G training exercise project. And if you're not already in it, if you email me, I will put you in it. And the email address to reach me at is kgsoren@earthlink.net. So my last name is truncated. So that's kgsoren@earthlink.net. And I'll put you in the group if you're not in it already.
thank you, Ken. That's I didn't have that on my list. I apologize. That's very good information as well. Anything else? Frank, did you have anything you want to add or?
We'll do everything we can to make both the video of this webinar and any other, maybe the question and answers that might have been unanswered yet. Maybe we'll have an answer for those. We'll make those available. And we'll get it publicized.
All right. Any other panel members have anything that they want to add? Thank you for your participation this evening. I appreciate your volunteering your time. I know everybody's time is valuable, and I really appreciate your volunteering your time to offer some insights to the learners as they try to prepare for becoming a CFI-G. I mean, we need CFI-Gs. We need good CFI-Gs, well-trained CFI-Gs, well-prepared CFI-Gs that want to do a good job. I'm not saying that you don't want to do a good job, but you have to have a desire. Okay, you have to have a desire to do a good job, and you have to put in the effort because it does take quite a bit of effort. So I appreciate your attending this evening, and I think unless there's something else, we're going to sign off. So it'll be similar times 2 weeks from tonight at the exact same times as we published, 9 o'clock on the East Coast, Central Time, 8 o'clock, Mountain Time, 7 o'clock, and West Coast will start at 6 o'clock. So,
Ron, Wander here. Will invitations be sent out to the people who attended tonight so that they don't miss it 2 weeks from now? Over.
Well, I think we're planning to use the same invitation methodology that we used last time. And so we distributed it on that flight instructor Google group. I know Ken put it on that flight instructor Google group. I know that Denise sent out messages to the people who had attended the seminar almost about 10 months ago now. It was last spring to that group of people. I'm not exactly sure how we,
I agree. Basically saying-
do we have any other way, Frank, to send out the message that you're aware of?
It went out to the chapters group. It went out to the membership by email, and it went out. It also went out to the people who were on the list. Plus, we added some of our scholarship recipients who hadn't yet been on that list. So we have 4 junior CFI-G scholarships from 17 to 21 years old who are. One of them just got her commercial rating down at Soaring Club of Houston. And she's an Air Force Academy cadet, 2nd year, so she's well on her way to becoming a CFI-G. And we've got one who's doing, he's already doing multi and single engine land. He also has a Silver Sea soaring badge and commercial glider rating, so he'll be adding his instructor privileges pretty soon. So, yeah.
Somebody on the chat just asked about Ken's link, his email, and he put it on the chat box there. So if you go on the chat box, you can see his email address.
Charlie Finn just commented that he got the message 3 or 4 different ways. So we're obviously reaching the community, I think.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so we'll try to get as many people out there, get the word out, so to speak. And I think one of the best ways is to point them toward the Ken Sorensen's comment about the Google group, CFI-G training Google group. So
And I've had about 10 emails already, so that's a good sign. And somebody asked how many people were here on the session tonight, and I was saying somewhere around 150 plus or minus. So that's good. That's great.
That's real good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll try to clean up my act a little bit. I know this is actually the first webinar I've ever hosted, and I need a little practice, but I'll try to clean up my act a little bit next time, and we'll see if we can't make it run just a little bit smoother as we go forward. So thanks for attending, and thanks to the panel for your insights and your participation as well. I know that the people that attended the webinar appreciate your insights, and I know I do too as well. So thanks very much for that. So we'll call it an evening, and thank you again for your participation.